I was a really good drinker. I was successful at drinking alcohol. Welcome back to another bonus episode in this series where we're talking about what's possible when you make a decision. And it's all about when we make that definite decision in our brain, what becomes possible and available to us and for us. And today I'm going to introduce you to Magda. Now, Magda is somebody that I went to school with. We haven't spoken for 30 years. But I saw a post of hers on Facebook last November celebrating 2 years of being sober, not drinking alcohol. And she talked about in this raw and honest post how she had found her life orbiting around alcohol. And I really wanted to find out what changed or what happened to make the decision. How did she navigate that challenging journey? And who has she become and what has happened because of that decision? Now, the reason I think this is so important is because we look at alcohol and how it's been glamorized. We look at alcohol as a way to celebrate, to commiserate, to manage stress, anxiety, and overwhelm, and all the things. And I also feel that conversely, we're in a place now where there is so much more drive towards alcohol-free living, more products on the market, more books and literature available. And I just wanted to put it out there to listen to somebody that has gone through it and to see the benefits and to pass that on to you. So I want you to kick back and enjoy this episode where I catch up with an old friend and we chew the cud, and there's some magic in here. So listen hard. Right, so Magda, you made the decision in November 2020 to quit alcohol, and I want to know, what was it that made that decision for you?
Yeah. So, it's interesting. I think it's been something that has been building for me over many years,
Mm.
probably over the last sort of 30 years.
Wow.
I was always a really good drinker. I wasn't aggressive or sloppy. I was very successful at drinking alcohol. It was
Mm-hmm.
fun. I was fun. And, alcohol just made that something that was better. Um, And so it wasn't like I was constantly going, "Oh, I've got to stop, I've got to stop." It wasn't like that. It just sort of gradually accumulated over the years. I wasn't one of those drinkers who was, waking up in the morning and having a drink, or,
Yeah.
I didn't feel like I fit into a sort of stereotypical bucket of an alcoholic. I didn't feel like that.
Right.
But I did know, and I became increasingly aware that I was very much influenced by alcohol. And, I started to direct my activities around whether there would be alcohol present. So, if I was going out and I knew that I was going to an event that there wasn't going to be booze out, I would make sure that I had a drink beforehand.
Wow.
Or if, I was going on a hike, like even something like as nice as going out and going for, a long hike,
Mm-hmm.
I might take a beer with me and be like, well, when I finish the hike, when I'm at the top of that hill, I'll sit and I'll have a beer and I'll look at, and so, and to me, that wasn't super strange. Like that just was how it was. Like
Right.
I sort of dictated everything I did around alcohol and making sure alcohol was there. And that was okay. And it got to a point where little things kept on creeping in. And I was like, there's something not right here. There's something not right here. One of the things was that, my ex-girlfriend at the time said to me, we both drank, and she was like, you get disconnected when you're drinking. I was like, really? I get disconnected? I didn't believe it. I was
Right.
like, yeah, when we have a drink, we sit down, we'll have some nice food and we'll have a drink. It's like, how is that disconnected? Like we're being more, it's part of becoming connected, if anything. And so I didn't believe it. And a lot of things, whilst I was drinking, I didn't really believe either. I would daily like have headaches or not feel good. And I just thought that was me. I just thought that was like, you know, part of growing older and everything. And it wasn't until I quit drinking and I was like, oh, I'm not taking Motrin every day. Like I don't have a headache every day. That I realized there was that sort of toxicity that was sort of growing in my body. And it was like,
Wow.
anyway.
I,
So it was sort of cumulative.
Can I just ask a question? Sorry, just to
Yeah.
interrupt you, but when you were making making those decisions, where you said like you was influenced by it and
Yeah.
you was planning for it, was you aware of something you was trying to gain from it, or was there an awareness of what might happen without it? Like,
Yeah.
was
That's
that present?
that's a great question. I think, you know, in retrospect, a lot of these things are in retrospect, right? But I think in
Mhm.
retrospect, there was a lot of things that I was trying to use alcohol to cope with, right?
Mhm.
So in stressful situations, I would, you know, if we're going out for drinks with people from work, it's like, okay, that's going to be a bit nerve wracking. Um, I'll be much more relaxed if I have a drink. So it was a coping mechanism in a
Mhm.
lot of situations. But then there were also other situations where it was a sort of celebratory ritual. And
Mhm.
that's something that I've really had to adapt now I don't drink, is like how I love celebrating. I
Mhm.
love a big party, you know, and how do I do that? How do I still feel like I'm rewarding myself without alcohol?
Mhm.
And so that's become a sort of really important part. And no, you know, and I'll do it now. We can talk about how I do it now, but you know, there's different ways, and you know, I'll spend the same amount of money on a non-alcoholic bottle of wine as I would on
Mhm.
a alcoholic wine. And you know, there's some really amazing non-alcoholic drinks, and which
Maybe
you know,
maybe in the States, not over here.
oh, is that right? Is that right? Oh, we should start. I'll start
It's
sending
certainly
you
not on the
some.
wine front. I've tried them all. Um, but yeah, I
Uh,
want.
oh, really? So many
Yeah,
good ones now. It's great.
I know. Anyway, we'll have another topic on that. But you know, so so
Yeah.
was there like a defining moment for you when you was like,
Yes.
right, enough? Can you tell us about that?
Yes, there was absolutely. And it was one of those moments where, like I was saying, I was using alcohol to cope with stressful situations. And it was
Mhm.
in November of 2020. And, you know, a few months into the pandemic, we're all isolating, at least over here, everything was outside. And actually, my boss was coming over with his wife and his new baby to have dinner in my back garden.
Mhm.
And I was like, it's great. You know, it was moderately stressful, not super stressful, but
Mhm.
you know, I was like, and my girlfriend was coming too, and I was like, okay, so you know, I got some beautiful food, I got some bottles of wine, and you know, I was nervous. I could feel this underlying anxiety around having a potentially stressful situation. So I
Mhm.
had a drink and I felt a bit better. And I was like, okay,
Mhm.
this is good. You know, it's that sort of immediate alleviation of anxiety with alcohol. But unfortunately, doesn't last very long, right? It's
No.
like the lasts maybe, I don't know, for me like 10, 15 minutes. And I'm like, okay, that did feel good.
Mhm.
But now I'm starting to come out of that sort of anxiety alleviating state. And so I'll have another drink, and that just kept on happening, right? And so, like, you know where this is going. Like after 2 or 3 hours, I'd drunk, you know, probably best part of a couple of bottles of wine, not
Yeah.
eaten so much,
Oh my
but
goodness.
I felt fine. Like I felt okay.
Yeah.
You know, I was obviously very relaxed by that point. Anyway, my boss left, and that's when I started to really feel the toxic effects. Like I was like, started spinning, and I'm like, oh shit, too much, you know. And I think I've done it many times over my life where I've had too much to drink, um, but this time it felt really different. And I think part of it was, you know, the pandemic. I'd been drinking a lot more, and so there'd been this sort of like daily drinking, and now I think I tipped a threshold. You know, it was like flipping a light switch where my
Mhm.
body was just like, oh no, no. And so my girlfriend stayed with me for a bit, and I was like, I'm spinning, I can't lie down. And you go through that
Oh, it's
sort of,
horrid, isn't it?
it's horrible, isn't it?
Yeah.
Like that
Yeah.
circle of like, okay, I'm too drunk to lie down. I can't walk around. I don't want to, you know, and I'm like, I had routines that I put in place for myself to sort of get through these moments where like I'd get a cold flannel, put it on my head.
Mhm.
That made me feel better for a few minutes. Anyway, it was awful. That night was really, and I remember it really vividly. And then the next morning, what happened for me, which didn't used to happen very much, was I woke up and I was like, okay, I'm hungover. I'm really hungover. I feel toxic. My head hurts, and I just started throwing up like every 30 minutes for
Wow.
pretty much the entire day. And that was the switch for me. That was like, oh, this is it. I've actually properly poisoned myself now.
Wow.
You know, and I sat there and I was like, oh, this is really bad. Why am I putting myself in a state where I've poisoned my body? I mean, that's like a not a good place to
No,
be in,
no.
right? And I made that decision that day. I was like, that this is it. I can't do this anymore. I can't go on like this. Um, and I'd had these sort of discussions with myself before, but this time I knew it was different.
Mhm.
It felt very final, and I was scared, to be honest. I was scared that I'd really screwed myself up here.
Mhm.
Um, and so I made that decision. And it's really interesting in retrospect, I think, just to recap a little bit, I'd done periods of moderation management. I don't know what they call this in the UK, but here they call
Mhm.
it moderation management, where you look at how much you're drinking and you you set yourself limits. So
Mhm.
let's say, I think it's 7 drinks a week, right? Is what they maximally recommend for
Mhm.
women. I don't know if that's the same in the UK. And so you set up your 7 drinks for the week. Like, okay, I'm just going to drink Thursdays and Saturdays, and I won't drink more than 2 drinks, and I make sure I space out each drink by an hour. You put all these rules in
Mhm.
place around your drinking, and that's what they call moderate. And I tried that multiple times, and I always made up an excuse to break those rules, right?
Mhm.
It's always like, well, but it's the Christmas party, so I'll let myself have 5 drinks that night, and
Yeah.
you know, or somebody's coming in from out of town, so I have to break that rule then. And
Yeah.
I would constantly break those rules.
I
And then one, sorry,
Sorry, no, I think what's interesting about that is that, when you were talking about all of that right there, it's it 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 doesn't help the fact that there is an awareness that the fact that you're having to moderate it means that
yeah,
there is a bit of a problem behind it, right? And
absolutely,
that putting those rules in place isn't dealing with the
exactly,
reason why you're doing it in the first place.
absolutely, absolutely. I mean,
So,
yeah, it's just like a very bad plaster on something.
mhm,
It's like really,
yeah.
but I
And
was too scared to let go. I was
And
like
did
too.
you sorry, did you find yourself, like, thinking about it even more because of that management plan?
Yes. Yeah, yeah, yeah. It was worse. It was way worse. And that
Right.
was part of me orbiting around this sun of alcohol then got
Mhm.
even bigger, right? Because then I'm like, okay, I've got these rules in place. I can only drink here. And it just became everything was a focus. Everything was focused around it at that
Mhm.
point. And so probably you know, the easiest part of not drinking was making that decision.
Mhm.
Right? Because once I'd made that decision and I said to myself, that's it, no more, I don't drink. That's what I said to myself was, I don't drink. I don't drink
Wow.
alcohol. Then there was no more questioning then, right? That was it.
I
I didn't
love
have
it.
to make up rules. I didn't have to, make up a plan for the week or think about it. It just eliminated me even having to think about alcohol and drinking. I don't drink. That's it.
Yeah. That's so
It became so
powerful.
much simpler.
Well, it's interesting because I think I shared this in a podcast earlier on. I was listening to a TEDx talk, and it was labeled something like the 100% rule that will change your life, or yeah, something like that. And the
Yeah.
guy was talking about, I think it was a statement from, I know he's a basketball player, and I know he's very tall because they all are. Michael Jordan, Michael
One of
Jordan,
them.
and I believe Michael Jordan said a 100% commitment is easier than 98%. And
Totally.
the way that because, like, I see a lot of stuff in pictures, and the way that I saw that in my brain was exactly how you just described it. In that 100% decision, you've closed all the doors on the other options. You've closed the questioning. You've closed the what's the word I'm looking for? Like the bargaining. You've
Yes.
closed it all down because you said, "I don't drink." Boom, that was it. And I
That's it.
I'd love for you to share, like, for other people that go, "Oh, well, you must have just found it easy." Like, if you think about people that spend their life yo-yo dieting and they rely on
Yeah.
willpower, and maybe like their nemesis is, I don't know, like chocolate bars, and they feel like there's never going to be a time when they're not going to be, a slave to the chocolate bar. Is there anything you can share with them to help them understand the power of like taking on that identity of I don't drink?
Yeah. I mean, it's such a funny concept, isn't it, when you think about it? And I didn't
Mm.
understand it until I did it. Like, I didn't think it was a possibility. There was not a part of my mind that thought that not drinking would be easier than drinking some,
Mm.
right? But just eliminating all of that, like you said, bargaining, you know, that sort of planning around,
Mhm.
oh, I'm going to drink here and here. Just having a simple decision that you can stick to and telling yourself, this is it, this is me. Now, it's interesting you talk about food, because sometimes I think about food and other addictions,
Mhm.
and they're a bit more complicated in a way, right? Because you've got to eat.
Well,
You can't say, I'm not going to eat,
we
right?
can't
Or,
survive on
you know,
dust, can we?
no, like sex addiction, you can't, I mean, you could say I'm not going to have sex, but you know what I mean? It's like,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
it's much more complicated in a way.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, with those ones. So I do think about that, and I wonder about, you know, different methods for decision making around things which are not so binary. You know,
Yeah.
cigarette smoking, binary, alcohol drinking, binary.
Yeah.
Those other ones are more complicated for
They
sure.
they are, and and that's where we come into that whole other conversation around the mental and emotional drivers that make us feel like we have an
Mhm.
issue with something in the first place. Because like there will be somebody out there that eats like 20 chocolate bars a week that doesn't
Yeah,
believe that they have a problem, that it's not in their identity, and they're happily eating their chocolate bars. And then
yeah,
there's somebody over here who's doing the same, who is living their life like you did, with this awareness and the judgment and the planning
mhm,
and the moderation. They're starting again tomorrow, and their life is driven by it. And that's the curiosity of being
yeah,
human, right? Like what makes one person think it's an issue versus somebody that doesn't. um
absolutely.
and I think once we, without going down the whole line of like everything comes down to self-love, in my
Mhm,
opinion, like if
mhm.
we loved ourselves, we'd make better choices. And when we're not making good choices, I think there is some kind of thing that we need to look at inside.
Yeah,
But that's like for another episode. So you've made this decision. You said you felt this instant shift. Was
yeah,
there, and so 2020, so we're like what, like we're over 2 years, 2.5 years down the line now, which is
yeah, yeah.
humongous.
That's right.
Were there times when
Mm,
your identity was challenged?
yeah, absolutely. Um, and it's always, it comes back to, you know, I spent a lot of time thinking about the reasons, you know, why I drank. And, you know, like I mentioned, some of it was to do with, you know, coping in stressful situations. Some of it's to do with celebrating. And those things still happen, right? Those things
Hmm.
still come up. Challenging situations still come up. I still go to work things, and, you know, everybody's drinking. I went to a wine tasting with work.
Wow.
And I prepped in, you know, in advance, and I sent an email saying, you know, look, I don't drink. And actually, you know, within the group of us that were going, there were 4 out of the 12 that were not drinking, which is
Wow.
pretty big actually.
Yeah.
And I think it just, you know, that speaks to how many people are moving away from
Hmm.
alcohol
Hmm.
completely. Um, and but when I got there, there was like a welcome, and they were like, yes, 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 we've got that covered. We've got it covered. There'll be non-alcoholic options for everybody. It's like, okay, great. I get there, and there's an opening reception where everybody's given a glass of champagne to show them the beautiful property, but there was no options for the 4 of us who didn't drink.
Wow.
We weren't even given a glass of water, right? It was ridiculous. And, and things like that. I mean, now they just make me mad, right? You know, when
Yeah.
I was drinking, I'd be like, oh, well, that's your fault. You don't drink. So I'm
Hmm.
sorry. But now I'm like, oh my God, it's ridiculous. Like, how can people be so narrow-minded
Hmm.
around, you know, just not meeting everybody's needs? It's like this assumption that everybody drinks alcohol,
Hmm.
is bizarre. But anyway, so things like that come up. And also, you know, when on my 2-year anniversary, I woke up feeling so sad. And I
Oh.
just was like, what is going on? Like, why do I feel so down about this? And I went over to my girlfriend's house and I turned up and I was crying. And she's sober, she's amazing. She hasn't drunk in 8 years. And she goes to me, "Oh, Magda, you miss your best friend alcohol." And I just cracked up because it was so true. I
Yeah.
was like, "What's my best friend? I miss you."
Yeah.
And just having that acknowledgement around what was going on was
Mhm.
huge, right? And just taking a look at myself and the situation and being and acknowledging those things. And that, that's one of the things I think that, you touched on self-care and um, you know, looking after yourself and being kinder to yourself.
Mhm.
It's like having that sort of ability to look back at yourself and be like, it's okay. It's okay to feel sad.
Mhm.
It's okay to feel happy. All it's you have all of these emotions, have them all, and it's just a moment in time, and then things will move on. Things will change, and there'll be
Yeah.
another situation in a minute.
Yeah, I mean, I remember when I did my EFT training years ago. I remember the instructor talking about like, I think she called it like was it a guiding star? No, a North Star.
Uh-huh.
And we talked about alcohol because, like you've explained, like going back to when we was at school, just like 5 years ago, I wish,
Yeah, that's
uh,
right. Just the other week.
5 years plus 20. Um,
Yeah.
And and you think about like the things we'd have at the rugby club, or when and you think about Christmases and birthdays, like you say, celebrations. There are
Yeah.
many North Star moments for so many of us where alcohol was included, and we had a laugh, and we felt like at that
Yeah.
time we were our truest self, and like exactly like you say, we don't
Yeah.
feel so intensely, if at all, that angst and so on. It's we have this whether it's a numbness or a softness or a relaxed or a loosening there, that I can totally see how you would feel like, wow, like I've lost that. And there is an element of grief there, right? I think
Absolutely.
I
100%. Yeah.
grief is, I did a podcast on this years ago about how we totally underestimate how many ways we experience grief, but we don't grieve. Like we just
Yeah.
put it in a box and we move on. So I really love how you brought that to light, that even though, and we'll talk about this briefly in a minute, like there was so much good happened and so much change occurred because of your decision, you still had to allow yourself these moments of like there was other stuff attached to this that I now don't have. So I
Yeah.
think that's so important.
Absolutely.
um so tell us a little bit, like,
Absolutely.
I just remember seeing a picture of you on Facebook like a couple of years ago. I think probably around about the time that you put that amazing post up about how you'd been orbiting around alcohol, and I was like, what an amazingly profound way of describing it. It was so visual for me. And I remember seeing a
Oh,
picture of you going, holy crap, she looks completely different to when I recognized her at school. Like you look
oh,
like,
really?
yeah, you look well, first of all, we all look grown up now, don't we? We all think we look the same as
You.
we do when we was at school, but we don't.
Yeah.
And I've seen you post about playing pickleball, which just the name makes me feel like I need to start a pickleball club somewhere over here. I don't even know what it is.
Oh, please do. I really want it to sweep the UK.
I'm
It's so
That's
fun.
it's on my list, so I'll keep you updated. But like, tell us what are some of the benefits? How has your life changed
Yeah.
because you made that decision?
Yeah. Oh my goodness. That's that's one of those questions where do you even start, right? I
Mm-hmm.
mean, I touched on a few of these things already. One, like just general health.
Yeah.
Part of saying these things out loud is it sounds a bit cliched. It sounds like the front of cover of a, Vanity magazine or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But general health is so much better.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have headaches daily. I didn't realize. I had no idea
Wow.
that alcohol, like even if I hadn't drunk the night before, I would have a headache.
Wow.
That was just how I felt. Like, and
Mm-hmm.
I was like, oh, that's just me. I very rarely need to take, you know, mo- um, ibuprofen or whatever for headaches anymore, which is
Mm-hmm.
great. My skin is so much better, so much clearer. My sleep is much, much improved. Like that sort of, that dysregulated sleep that you get after even after like half a beer, even after a
Yeah.
beer,
Yeah.
I would
Mhm.
wake up and be like, need to go to the loo or get a glass of water or something.
Yeah.
But that doesn't happen anymore. And the other big sort of change in terms of like physical being is I feel much more aware of my own body. Like I feel much more tuned in. Sorry, I slip into little Americanisms here and
I'll let you off.
there. Tuned in. I feel a lot more tuned in to sort of understanding what's going on in my body.
Mm.
So, I'm aware of my limbs. I'm aware of how I feel. I'm aware if I feel tired, that it's not necessarily, I had a couple of drinks, there's something else going on. Am I stressed? Am I, you know, and that is, I love that. I love knowing, I mean, this is my being. I love
Mhm.
having a better understanding of what's going on with me physically and emotionally.
I was going to say, like,
And then
so
there's all the other stuff like, go ahead.
sorry, I was just thinking, I was talking about all sort of like the physical things, and obviously because you touched on the fact that part of the reason the drink was there was because of, you know, situations where there might be anxiety or discomfort or
Yeah,
some kind of emotion you don't want to deal with. How
yeah.
do you experience that whole thing differently now? Like, do you have them less, or do you just manage them in different ways?
That's a really good question. I think a little bit of both, to be
Right.
honest. I think I had this preconception that I couldn't handle social situations without alcohol, that it would
Mhm.
be really hard. Um, and maybe that's because, we started drinking when we were, 17, 18, and that's just
Mhm.
how it's been in social situations.
Yeah.
But it's not like I remember like the first few times I did it, I was like, oh, like it's actually not any different.
Mhm.
Like it's really hard to explain until you've tried it, right? It's like you think it's going to be awful, you think it's going to be hard. It's very, very similar to how it is with alcohol.
Mhm.
And so getting through that sort of preconceived like stigma within myself has helped me deal with those sort type of situations. I would say with other type of where I would normally turn to a drink, like, after a hot day, I'm tired, the kids have been going on and on and on. I might have turned to a drink before. I do have a lot of other sort of self-care things. You mentioned
Mhm.
pickleball. I love it. Don't get me, don't get me wrong. I love it. I'll go out and I'll play. There's a lot of open plays for pickleball around here. It's okay. A little brief summary. It's like ping pong slash badminton on half a tennis court. That's all you.
Okay, I'm gonna YouTube that.
Get on it. But I'll go out and I'll meet, there's groups of us that will go to the courts and you'll play with strangers or you'll play with friends. And it's social, or it can be totally, you don't have to talk to anybody if you don't want to.
Mm.
And, it's just a great way of getting outside and doing something meditative,
Mhm.
right? Focusing on something that isn't in your own head for me is really important.
Yeah.
Like that could be taking the dog for a walk. That could be, sitting down and actually chatting with the kids and asking them what's going on with them. It could be going out and playing pickleball. It doesn't have to be things that used to annoy me with sort of self-care things, so that people, when they, it seems very healthy, has to be healthy. It doesn't
Yes.
have to be healthy.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to, that doesn't have to be the focus of it. But it is something that, just breaks the cycle of what you're thinking
Mhm.
about and allows you to sort of just take a breath, come back inside yourself and
Love that.
recognize what's going on and look
Yeah.
at what you're thinking and what's going on around you and why are you feeling anxious and stressed.
Well, that brings us back to what we said at the beginning, like the emotional and mental like drivers, where we've already created like this habit cycle, right? That
Yeah,
that we're unaware of. So your body gives you all these cues. Oh, I'm feeling stressed. My heart rate's gone up. I've got palpitations. Da 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 da.
yeah,
And your brain then like will give you the taste of alcohol or whatever it is, whether it's food or drugs or cigarette, like
yeah,
whatever it is.
Yeah,
And I think that's the thing that's hardest, isn't it? Is because we see it as a physical action, but there is so much more going on unconsciously.
totally.
And what you've just said there about I loved like how you just described about having so much more awareness of yourself. We
Yeah.
talked about this like before we got on, and how, you know, no matter how difficult and how shitty life has been over the years for lots of, you know, for us and for lots of other people, when you get to a stage where you can be really grateful for the journey and who you became and what you was willing to experience to get here, like I think that is such a gift that we
Yeah.
can celebrate ourselves for.
Oh,
um and you know, like if you think about, I remember there's a guy called, I don't know if you've heard of him, Bruce Lipton, that
oh
talks.
yes, yes, yes.
Okay, right. I thought you might. So, and I love how Bruce Lipton talks about how we are basically like these gigantic cells that
Mhm,
go out into the world, and like we're just like the cells in our body pick up hormones and acidity and temperature change and other. We're like going around and we're using our senses to read our environment and to react.
mhm.
And I think we've become so overstimulated that we sort of we think we need these things so that we can disconnect for a while. When actually you've already just explained.
Completely. And that's
it.
like and the whole thing about drinking.
Yeah,
You're taking those cells, right, and you're just dumping them in in ethanol,
yeah.
right? That's it. I mean, it's
Thank you for
and
that
that's I
visual.
mean, I've read so much good what they call quit lit, you
Yeah,
know, chick flicks, quit lit.
I love
Um,
that.
and the one that that really resonated with me was a book which I don't really like the title of, but it's called Quit Like a Woman, and
Okay.
it's very, you know, it resonated with me because she doesn't like the term alcoholic, the lady who
Mhm.
writes it. You know, she's
Mhm.
like, and I struggled with that as well. I was like, you know, there's this alcohol is an addictive substance.
Mhm.
It's a chemical, it's ethanol, you know, that's it. Does you can dress it up and give it and put it in an expensive bottle, but at the end of the day, it's ethanol.
Mhm.
And if you give ethanol to anybody in sufficient quantities, they'll become addicted to it. That's just
Mhm.
it. That's the nature of it. It's a chemical reaction. Now, different people have different thresholds for reaching that addiction,
Mhm.
right? And different people, depending on why they're drinking alcohol, will drink it at a frequency that, you know, will accelerate them into that point of addiction quicker than others. Um, you know, and there's a lot of talk about, you know, using alcohol. What's the underlying trauma that's
Mhm.
going on that causes you to use alcohol, that causes you to rely on alcohol? And and it's not until you remove alcohol from the system that you can really start looking at what is going on inside yourself. Why are you feeling triggered in situations?
Mhm.
You know, why are you feeling anxious? What's really disturbing you in this situation? I think about this, you know, in terms of like social situations. Why do I feel nervous in social situations?
Mhm.
You know, apart from the sort of inherent part of, I think everybody feels a certain level of, you know,
Yeah.
anxiety. Many people embarrassing themselves or, you know, not being cool enough.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, well, I look back on that and I look back on my childhood and, you know, there's some elements of, okay, I used to feel like that as a kid. Is this still coming through? You
Yeah.
know, not getting picked for sports first, right? That's that embarrassment where you're
Yeah.
standing in front
Yeah.
of other people and you haven't got picked for the team. You're like, oh shit, everybody's looking at me. You know, it's really weird,
Yeah. Yeah.
right?
It's
How these things
th-
stay with you.
there's so many layers. I just had to giggle to myself things when you sort of said about like wanting to fit in and not wanting to stand out. And I think I remember some horrific experiences at the rugby club where I most definitely, after too many drinks, did stand out and and absolutely didn't fit in because I was making a complete like jockey of myself. Um, so it's so interesting
That's
how,
the problem, right?
you know, it's w- we look at it from one side, and everything's multidimensional, and I think being able to be inquisitive and to not to, like, one of the things that I say literally in every one of my podcasts is no blame, no shame, no judgment. It's just neutral observation. And I think when
Yeah.
we can apply that to ourselves over and over and over again, just to challenge the decisions that we make or the feelings that we have, and just be willing to kind of like journey there is so much freedom in that. And it goes back to what you said just a bit before, be willing to be in all of those emotions. Like, I was talking to a friend today, and she's a youth worker, and she said, we provide the space to help children find the vocabulary and the permission to feel every emotion without judging it.
Yeah, that's
And
amazing.
so true for us. Even as adults, there are emotions that we've been trained that are good and bad, things that we don't want to feel, things that trigger us back to childhood. This
Yeah,
inherent desire for us to be seen, heard, and validated. And so we're walking around in these adult bodies, but our inner child can sometimes be at the helm,
yeah,
and and they want to feel that sense of that peace and all of that. So I just find it so fascinating. Now, I know
yeah.
we've got to wrap up time, so if I can ask you this one question: how who who are you now without the alcohol compared to who you were before?
It's a good question. I mean, and it sort of comes back to what you were just saying about judgment and looking at myself and other people, I think.
Mm-hmm.
I am definitely, or I feel way more open minded. I had a lot of judgment
Wow. Okay.
around other people drinking or not drinking. Like, if I saw somebody not drinking, I'd be like, why are you not drinking? What's wrong with you? Right.
Yeah.
And seriously. And that was, in retrospect, because I had a problem with alcohol,
Mm-hmm.
right? If I didn't have a problem with alcohol, that wouldn't even occur to me whether they were
Exactly.
drinking
Yeah.
or not
Mm-hmm.
drinking. So I definitely think I've become way more open-minded, less judgmental against other people and against myself.
Mm-hmm.
Like what we were talking about. It's okay to have all the feelings. It's
Yep.
okay to be happy and sad, to be anxious and relaxed. Like, you can have all these things. You
Yep.
can feel all these things
Mm-hmm.
simultaneously. Um, and I also think I feel like I'm a lot kinder with myself. If I it's one of the things, when I was reading the quit lit stuff, is like, if you feel tired, go to bed,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
Like, why do
Simple.
we sort of punish ourselves to
Mm-hmm.
push through situations where we don't feel good? If you
Mm-hmm.
don't feel good, it's okay to lean into that.
Yep.
And that was something for me which was sort of huge in that, in becoming somebody who doesn't drink alcohol anymore. Like, I feel a lot more free
Mm-hmm.
from things that were holding me in.
And do you think that, just the last question, do you think there'll be a time, I'm not one for labels, right? I feel like
Yeah,
sometimes it can cause so much more space between us than it does join us when we start putting labels on people and on things.
yeah,
But at the moment, like, we've talked about how there is definitely this divide between, like, oh, I don't drink. Oh, why not? It's like, is it
yeah,
a medical thing? No, I just choose not to drink. Oh, well, and I
yeah.
can totally relate to that conversation. But do you think there'll be a time when, like, that's
Right.
not even a thing? Like,
I
it's
do.
not, it's not even a
I actually do,
conversation.
and I do, and I think alcohol is treated in a very similar way to cigarette smoking was treated in the sort of 50s and 60s. It's a
Mm-hmm.
sort of glamorized appeal of alcohol. Every TV show, every social media, it's everywhere.
Yeah.
And cigarette smoking was the same, right?
Mm-hmm.
But you don't now find, people apologizing for not smoking.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't happen like that. And I do think I mean, at least here in the US, is a big shift away from drinking.
Mm-hmm.
And even in in the younger generations, which is when we were just like getting excited about, yeah, we can go drink now,
Yeah.
doesn't seem to be as interesting,
Yeah.
you know.
I,
And I think there'll be that shift. I think it will get to a point where it will be much more acceptable and people won't question it.
mm-hmm.
It won't be alcohol. Not drinking alcohol is one of the few things that you have to explain why you're
Mm-hmm.
not doing it,
Yeah.
which
It's
is
weird.
crazy, right?
It's really weird. I mean, and I've read posts about that before, and it had never occurred to me to, like, that people say, well, no one asks you why you don't do drugs.
Yeah,
You know, like,
exactly.
you're not snorting coke today? No, I'm not. Okay, then what's the problem there?
Oh,
Like,
it's a
we don't
present.
have that. But but because I think, and I think, just to kind of wrap up as well, you know, you said it, like when you said like you would judge other people for not doing it,
Mhm.
like if you was going out for a drink and somebody else wasn't drinking. But I
Totally.
wonder, like, how much of that is because you know, so if you go out, and I've had it before, if I've decided not to drink and someone goes, why are you not drinking? And sometimes I wonder whether it's because that person wishes that they were able to not drink, you know, and so it's easier for them
Totally.
to project that on
Totally. It
you.
absolutely is. Because, when you meet people who don't care about drinking, and the people who don't care about alcohol, it doesn't even occur to them.
Yeah,
It doesn't even occur to them to ask that question. But
yeah,
it really does seem to be the people who are questioning their own relationship with alcohol,
yeah,
whether consciously or subconsciously, they're the ones who are making the judgments.
yeah. I love that. What an amazing, I mean, I feel like I could talk about this for ages because there's so many layers
Yeah,
behind these decisions. Maybe we'll have to do like a part two, but I
let's
just want to
do.
thank you so much for like sharing really honestly and just providing a very, you know, honest and simple approach really to like what you did, like for something that can feel so massive. You know, when you said I just made that decision, it made total sense to me, having been doing some more podcasts on that recently. So huge thanks, and I shall keep watching you play pickleball and and get the pickleball revolution going over in the UK. And just thank you so much for being
I know you can do it. I know you can do it.
thank you so much, but thank you so much for being here, Magda.
Oh, thank you. It's really great to talk with you.
I'll speak to you soon.
Bye.